Hi, my name is Cal Evans, and I'm here with my good buddy, Mr. Keith Danger Casey. Yes, Danger is this man's middle name. Say hi to everybody, Keith.
Hey, hi to everybody, Keith.
I knew that was coming. You're predictable at times.
It's going to be one of those.
It really is. We're going to talk about software architecture and specifically what it takes to become a software architect. And Keith, you've been doing this for quite some time. I knew you back when you were just a lowly, code jockey like me, but you've advanced in your skills very far beyond what I do. So I want to talk to you about what it takes to get there, what the skills are. But let's start off with some of the easy stuff. Exactly what is software architecture and what is a software architect?
Yeah, so I always compare it to the building trades. So if you look at somebody who's building a house, there's the person that comes on site, they're sinking 2x4s, they're pouring concrete, they're driving nails, they're actually making it work. And that's great. That is vital. You can't have a house without that step. But there's actually a step before that. And the step before that is the architect. It's the one who comes up with the plan, looks and describes, here's how things are going to fit together. Make sure everything fits together in the first place and has the overarching vision for the house. So whether you're the carpenter or the plumber or the electrician, you know your system backwards and forwards. You know it completely inside out. But it's really the architect that has the overall vision of what's going on, how things are going to come together, and hopefully what the results should look like.
Now, going along with that analogy, when you're architecting systems, do you actually draw something out like the blueprints, or is software architecture more cerebral? You just keep it all floating in your head?
No, I think if it's just floating in your head, it doesn't count. I tell everyone I work with, until it's written down, it doesn't count. It doesn't exist. I do this whether we're talking about like pitching companies or designing systems. When it's in your head, you can have these contradictions. You can have these contradictions that they don't always fit together. You don't even think about, like they aren't highlighted to you. So I always tell people, write them down, draw them out, make sure that you can express it to other people. So my background is blurred, but this is a whiteboard and that's a whiteboard. So I've got two whiteboards right here. And in fact, yeah, this one is covered in drawings right now. If you can't draw it, there is no way in the world somebody can build it. So I really say, write it down, draw it first.
What kind of drawing system? Do you use UML? Do you use flowcharts? How do you express a software architecture in drawing?
I'm not even sure I can spell UML. No, realistically, the drawing really depends on who you're expressing it to. If you're expressing it to an outsider of your system who just needs to know that, yes, this thing is thought through, then simple block diagrams is probably sufficient. Something you draw in, not even Visio, you might draw in PowerPoint or MS Paint or something, or Keynote if you're on the Mac. Just real simple blocks of here's what it is. When you get into the deeper sort of components, you need to start thinking about, here's what a database diagram might look like. You might think in terms of sequence diagrams. So you might start thinking in terms of UML, especially when you start talking about the interactions. So when you're drawing out, my system or my user is going to come to the system and here's what they're going to do. You probably want to start sketching out sequence diagrams to show how information flows back and forth. And if something goes wrong at a particular step in the sequence, what happens?
Interesting. So it sounds like expressing a software architecture visually is almost like a fractal. And the more you drill down, it looks a little bit different, but it's all part of the same diagram. But you can keep drilling down and keep drilling down.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Google Maps. When you pull up Google Map of the United States, you see national borders. You might show state borders, whatever. When you start zooming deeper and deeper into like Texas, you see state borders, you start seeing rivers, you start seeing streams. You don't start seeing individual streets yet, but you have to get closer and closer and closer. And realistically, it's the exact same information. It's just it's a more fine-grained analysis of the information, the deeper you go. And realistically, somebody who's designing streets, that worldview isn't very useful. You need to get down to that level of detail.
That brings me to the next question. Software architecture, it sounds like you're at the high level, but you've got to be able to drill down. How does this differ from being just a senior developer?
I think that comes down to the view of the picture of the building, of what you're constructing. So to go back to my earlier construction analogy, the architect is the one that's drawing the plans for the house. The senior developer, they're the ones that completely own the bathroom. They completely own the plumbing. They completely own the electricity. They have a critical, vital part that the whole thing doesn't work without them. But realistically, they own one part. So the master carpenter would be the senior developer, and they have their apprentices that are working with them, helping them do things. They know their system inside and out, and they know how it fits into the overall picture, but the overall picture is not their show to run.
Very interesting. And that analogy is holding up very well. So we're not stretching it into odd shapes.
I'm good at this so
nicely.
far. It's pretty good for making it up on the fly, isn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, so is software architect, is that a role that a developer can play, or is that a rank on an org chart?
I think it's a role and it's a set of responsibilities.
Okay.
The getting there, you can't get, well, I guess you can get promoted into systems or software architect. I think it's really dangerous to just treat it as the next level of software developer, though. Like senior developer to software architect, I don't think is a path that always makes sense. So if you've been at the same company, now you're senior, you're like, I want the next level. No, it's a different, wider set of skill sets. So if you think about the analogy that I'm going to continue stretching, when you've got the electrician knows the breaker box, they know the wiring, they know the exact size of wire that has to go through each circuit depending on the current. They know that system backwards and forwards. To draw the overall house, to draw the blueprints, to be able to make that, sure, it requires understanding the electrical, but it also requires a lot of other things. You need to understand, how does a plumbing system work? How close can things be to sewage? So when we think about this in software sense, it's not just how do I build this thing? It's how do I solve the customer's problems? How do I understand this? Who the stakeholders are across this entire system? What the individual components are? How do they fit together? Where the architect doesn't need to know the gauge of wire that goes in that wall, but they need to know wire goes in that wall. I don't think it's just a quick and easy promotion into it. It's really expanding your skill set out quite a bit.
Then if it's a role, not a rank, how do you, as a manager, how do you figure out who to put in that role? And is it our new software architect, or is it for this project, your architect, but maybe for the next project, somebody else is going to be?
For that, I really think developing a software architect takes years. I think it really takes a deep understanding of the field, of the tools you're working in, the systems you're doing, maybe in sometimes the market, the industry you're working in. I think you can have a software architect rotate out for very small projects. If you're building the shed, you can have a newbie software architect get a feel for it, understand it. Odds are they're going to be working under a senior architect or somebody like that to make sure to check the math, for lack of a better explanation. But realistically, it takes such a wide, diverse skill set. It's really hard to do. And it's not something you want to give over easily, because just like in building a house, if the foundation is wrong, if the initial first steps are wrong, the project's going to turn out catastrophically. There's no way to go back and replace a lot of that stuff without having to go back to the beginning of the project. At that point, people lose their jobs. People end up being demoted, being chewed out continuously, or you end up with a death march trying to get things rebuilt and done on time.
I've been on a few of those, and the last one I was on, I wasn't the architect, I was the director. I hired the architect, and in a lot of ways, he was very good for the job, but in a couple critical ways, he wasn't. And that was what really hurt us. One of the critical ways of him not being right was he listened to me way too much. So, I mean, that's cute to say, but no, seriously, as my architect, I expected more pushback, and he didn't give me pushback on some critical areas, and I made some serious mistakes. And I don't blame him for those mistakes, but I blame him for not pushing back. So.
Well, and if you have an architect who can't stand up for themselves, who can't draw that line and go, no, this is a bad idea, here's why, you have a major problem on your hands, because the downstream, the project, the team, customers are dependent on the decisions and the things that architect does. If you have somebody who's weak or somebody who's not prepared for the role, you're taking serious risk that everyone's going to pay for sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a little bit about how we architect systems, and we talked a little bit about the role, but one of the things that keeps rolling around in my mind, and part of it is like I said, I've hired architects before, so I know where I want them to fit in. But do you, in the projects that you've worked on, the architects you've worked with, are they people managers? Like, are they the equivalent of a tech lead or something like that? Or is architect literally a dotted line off over here and they just draw the blueprints?
Yeah, they're usually not people managers. If you have a team of architects, sometimes you'll have a junior or a mid underneath a senior. So you might have some management there, but realistically, they don't manage the developer team because just like your architect needs to be able to push back, sometimes your senior developers need to be able to push back against the architect because they know that component, they know that system really well, and they need to be able to turn to the architect and go, no, this is a bad job, a bad idea. You don't want to do it this way. Here's why. So they generally are not people managers. They're generally the dotted line, a resource to pull into individual projects and efforts.
That's an excellent way to do that. And I usually, or to phrase that, and I usually rail against calling people resources, but in this particular case, it actually works and it works well. So that, they can, an architect can be attached to multiple projects and can help design the multiple projects. They're not in charge of building it, and they're not in charge of the people that are building it. Now, you've worked with a lot of them, and you have served as architect on several projects. I've seen you do this. How important is something like communication skills, which we always consider a soft skill? I talked with our friend, Josh Holmes, not long ago about communication and public speaking. But how important is that for an architect to be able to get up and express an idea?
It's vitally important. I'd say it's the second most important skill in their toolbox. If you can express your idea as well, and that is in pictures and diagrams that we were talking about earlier, that's in the written word, trying to explain or defend your decisions. That's in front of the team and customers, product managers, or whatever, being able to describe things. If you can't do those things, it doesn't matter how good your idea is. It will never be done. It'll never be implemented. It'll never have that coherent vision. So I advise at my undergrad in the computer science department. And after the technical skills, I push really hard on, you need to teach students, especially new students, how to communicate. Your career will be significantly better if you can communicate effectively.
Oh, I totally agree, and wish I'd figured that out much earlier in my career. Hey, so communication is important, but you said right after the technical skills, communication is important. What are the most important skills needed to be a software architect?
Technical chops. Like I said a minute ago, it doesn't matter how good your idea is if you can't express it well. You really need a good idea, though. You need to have that understanding. You need to be able to, it doesn't have to be perfect. Software architects get wrapped around the axle trying to say this architecture needs to be perfect. No, most of the time there are no perfect architectures. There are only trade-offs. And there's understanding, look, if we do it this way, this is what it's going to take. This is what's going to cost. These are what the consequences are going to be. But if we do it this way, here are the other consequences. If you can't understand what the trade-offs of that, it doesn't matter. Even communicating it well doesn't help. You really need to be able to at least lay out those options. I was actually working on a project recently, and I said, okay, look, there are two approaches to this problem. One is going to be quick and dirty, but it'll calm down the customer today, but we're going to have to go clean it up later. Or there's the long-term solution that might take a couple quarters and the customer's going to be pissed off in the meantime. All I wanted everyone to understand was, hey, look, there are trade-offs to this. Yes, we can go ahead and we can make the customer happy today, but that means that we need to allocate time to clean up this mess later on, because it will be a mess. There are always going to be more additional things. So you need to have the technical chops, and that's from shipping code, building things, screwing things up, breaking things. What's the old saying? You don't get wisdom without making mistakes, and you don't make mistakes if you have wisdom, or something like that. Like something, I don't know, but you need to screw it up. You need to have bruises. You need to have those scars from those previous things. I was talking with somebody yesterday or earlier this week, and I told them point blank, I said, look, I've made all these mistakes before. I've got scars to prove it. Let me help you make different mistakes. Leverage my experience, leverage my understanding to make this work better, so you can make your own creative, foolish mistakes. Your own important mistakes.
Our friend Paul Jones loves to quote Thomas Sowell, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And that's so true in software. Everything is going to be a trade-off, no matter what you think it is. It's not going to be perfect. There's always going to be something wrong with it.
So in an engineering background, we always have to think about the cost and the benefit of situations, because if you're talking about physical engineering, there's not going to be a single approach. There's going to be the approach that fits your need at the time. And sometimes the needs you have reflect the team and the team's abilities, not even necessarily the customer's requirements.
So technical chops, number one. Communication is a close second. I've got the technical chops. Not really. I don't. But if I were a developer that had the technical chops and I have master communication, how do I know I'm ready to be a software architect? Is it a number of years of experience, holding a certain degree, a career milestone that I've hit, anything like that? Or do you just know?
No, it's not like you're the chosen one kind of thing. And it's not based on experience strictly. It's not based on years on the job or anything like that. It's really based on a hunger to know more. If you're always looking to take what you have and learn what the adjacent topics are and expand that out, that's a pretty good sign that you might be a candidate for being a software architect. If you are totally happy working on one technology, going deep and deep and deep in one particular thing, you're not an architect. And there's nothing wrong with that. The master carpenter is still a master carpenter. Yeah. But if you're really good at PHP and you're really good at databases, and then you're really good at web servers, and you're starting to think about, large scale architecture, large scale database, like high traffic systems. And then you start thinking about, security aspects, and you start thinking about that circle that's getting wider and wider in terms of adjacent skills. That's a pretty good sign that you're trending towards being an architect. One of the things I always look for is somebody who has a hunger beyond what's immediately necessary for this job. If you need to spin up an Angular front end, that's great. If you spin up an Angular front end, you're like, oh, this JavaScript stuff is kind of cool. And then you start playing with a couple other frameworks, so you start understanding the mechanics of it. If you build your own framework, please, God, don't release it. But if you build your own framework to kind of figure out the mechanics of things, that's a good sign that you're trying to understand what the trade-offs are. Yeah. So I take that as a pretty good sign. Unless you release it. And then that's 3 strikes immediately. You're out.
Liz Smith, who used to be in the PHP core, I don't think she is anymore, but she used to be really involved, once said in a talk that every developer should write their own framework once and then throw it away, just so you understand what goes into one. But I see the point, the curiosity. Yeah. And if you're curious and you've expanding your skills, we used to call it a jack of all trades, but these days, that got kind of a bad connotation. So now I guess we call them software architects, but they can see all the moving pieces. They can see the big picture.
And Liz's point is great, because I remember her saying that too. And that's great, because it's really easy to look at a framework and criticize it. We all have our hated frameworks that we make fun of, that we criticize, that we poke fun at. We look at it, we go, why the hell did they do that? When you actually have to sit down and build it, and you have to start thinking about those edge cases and think about, I could do it this way. And this really makes this one use case fantastic. It turns out only 1/3 of my users have that use case. Ooh. Now we have to go back and we go, okay, what's the second best use case? Or what's the second best implementation that would address more of those use cases? You're doing architecture at that point. You're understanding what's the customer or the user trying to do. How do I make it so that can be done effectively with as little as pain as possible?
Excellent point. So we know when we should start thinking about that. If I'm thinking about that, if I'm watching this, or I'm hoping somebody's watching this besides mom, and somebody's thinking, hey, I think I want to make the jump to software architect, I fit the bill. What are some resources or some next steps that you would recommend for those interested?
Yeah, well, first of all, hi, Cal's mom. Glad that you're watching this. No, I really try to encourage people to build their toolbox. And I mean that on the technical side and on the communication side. So on the technical side, I'm a big fan of McConnell's Code Complete. That's a little dated right now, but he also has a rapid prototyping book. Is it Steve McConnell? I haven't read those in a while. Pragmatic Programmers, getting that wider perspective of the world. Big fan of Martin Fowler's Design Patterns series. The first time you read the Design Patterns book, most people go, oh, I can use all of these. No. It's a toolbox. You're building a toolbox. And just because you have a hammer doesn't mean everything in the world is a nail. Yeah. But one of the things that those will start teaching you to do is there's two things. One, to be able to recognize a nail, so you know you need to pull out the right tool for it. Two, it'll start giving you a framework on how to communicate about things. Mm-hmm. You know, if I walk up to somebody, a developer, and I go, oh yeah, this looks like you'd use an adapter pattern here. I just saved an entire conversation with a handful of words. So that gets into the communication aspects. I always recommend improve your speaking and writing skills as much as possible. So writing, do more of it. Do more of it and focus on my 11th grade English teacher always had a phrase, concise but precise. Use as few words as possible to express the complete idea. Real simple and real hard. It's exceptionally hard to do. But when you get better at it, the better you express your ideas, the better off you're going to be. But then that also means the drawing that goes along with it. So make sure that if you're going to do like a UML style drawing, try to use the right symbols. Try to use the right terminology to describe things. There's nothing more irritating than when a senior developer sits down in front of a drawing and they know that symbol, that interaction is not right. It's going to drive them up the wall.
I had one of my teams, we had a senior architect, we were building Java at the time. And this was way back in the early days of Java.
My condolences.
Yeah, my therapist says I don't have to talk about it if I don't want to. But we were building this, and I had a architect and I had a senior developer, and they were both very bright. And I was one of those managers that believe you hire people smarter than you, and I got lucky and I hired people smarter than me. And throughout all the architect decisions, there was a new term that Sun had just released. It was the Java bean, and Java bean actually meant something. Well, I used that term to mean any object. That's not what it meant.
You drove those guys up the wall, didn't you?
My architect was old enough to just let things slide because he knew what I was saying. My senior was this young kid, and he was a great programmer, but he didn't have the maturity yet. And I drove him just up the frickin' wall to the point where we almost came to blows at one point. And then I stopped using the term bean.
There's actually a way to abuse that well too. This is one of my Keith hacks. So if you're ever working on a team and you need design help, and your organization has designers and maybe they've pushed you off a couple times, or you're so far down in their queue, you're not going to get them for a while, choose your own color palette. So I like fluorescent orange and fluorescent greens. So I go ahead and I throw some of those in there. You know, like the background's fluorescent green, the buttons are fluorescent orange because, well, they're important. Just like construction workers, you want to be able to see the construction worker on the road. You want to be able to see the button. So you choose colors like that, and then you show it to your designers. They'll flinch. They'll look at it and they'll go, oh. So don't
and then they have
make
to
things
fix it.
Flash. Don't make things flash. You do not want to induce seizures. But if you can at least get them to flinch, they'll go, oh God, why'd you choose that? And you go, oh, well, it's important. I thought orange was important. And they'll say, can I just clean this up for you? Oh yeah, of course. Here's the design files.
This is the evil that I have put up with for 15 years. That's not a life hack. That's just a way for him to manipulate people. Anyhow.
Hey, it's for the good of the team. It's for the good of the team.
Absolutely. So wrapping it up, I'll ask you the question I love to ask. What didn't I ask you? What would you like to say about software architecture that I did not put in one of our questions?
Yeah, I do appreciate you giving me the questions in advance. Let me cheat a little bit. Let's see. So I think there's one term out there that really frustrates the crap out of me. And I think it frustrates you also. In fact, I was citing an article recently about, do you have the empathy to be a software architect? And I think that is the singularly, maybe not the singularly, most misused word, but it's up there. Most people think of empathy as having compassion for people and being able to understand them and everything. More precisely, it's about getting into their perspective and understanding their point of view. So if you take the actual definition of empathy, it's what is my customer trying to do? Why are they trying to do this? What goals are they trying to accomplish? And then it works. So I think empathy ends up being very useful there. How most people use empathy now, it's kind of a misnomer, it's misused. It ends up being way more squishy, touchy-feely than it needs to be. But One of the things I've often seen software architects then take the step up to is into a product owner or product manager. That's the next level up in a lot of ways. And that gives you complete ownership of a product or a product suite or something like that. So it's not just drawing the plans for the house. It's probably sitting down with the customer or the eventual resident to design what the house looks like for those first artistic drawings, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And realistically, I think empathy, the right definition of empathy is really important there, because you need to understand, what is the person trying to do? Why are they trying to do it? What problems are they trying to address now? What are the likely problems and things and opportunities they're going to have in the future? Mm-hmm. And I think if we can start permeating that idea at all levels, I think we can win. So when you're the senior developer, if you understand, here's how the system is being used, here's how my component of the system actually solves bigger problems, I think that's amazing. I think that's something we should do more of. And just a career hack in general. Most software developers, we've really screwed things up. And I don't mean our code. I mean our careers.
I get what you mean, yeah.
But we have been very much in the mindset of, leave me alone, let me just write code. And I think we're selling ourselves short there. I think we're really getting this position where we don't have understanding of the business. We don't have any understanding of how our systems are going to be used, and we're going to suffer as a result. Because if you're the software developer in the back room that doesn't talk to anyone, doesn't interact with anyone, doesn't understand the customer, you're super easy to outsource. You're super easy to get rid of. You're not valuable. So I've been telling more and more people, get closer to the cash flow of your business. Understand where it comes from. Mm-hmm. Understand, when I write this code, when I build this component, when my system launches, here's who cares about it. Here's how it's going to affect the bottom line of the company. I just left Okta a few months ago. And one of the things I always said there, because we were working with developers, is developers have exactly 2 goals in life: build something useful and go home. Mm-hmm. And that's it. We need to broaden things out a little bit, and we need to think more on that useful part, because we need to understand useful, to measure, to really make useful valuable to us. We need to just understand who finds it useful. Why? What are they going to do better, faster, easier as a result of this? How is my customer, my end user, going to be able to go home on time because I did my job well? If we have a better understanding of that as an industry, I think we're going to build better systems. I think our systems are going to be more resilient. And oh, by the way, we'll probably make more money in the process.
Yes.
So it's good for all of us.
I used to be that developer. They go away and leave me alone. When I started software development, it was fun to say I got into programming computers because I didn't want to deal with people. But 16 years in DevRel kind of dispelled that whole myth. So we do have to. And even back in the early days, yes, I would hole up and write code, but then I was writing business applications. And so I would sit with the salespeople for a day or two and just watch. And when they would finish an order and hang up the phone, I'd have a barrage of questions. They hated having to spend time with me, but I had to understand the system. I had to have empathy for them, or I couldn't build the system that was going to make their life easier.
And if you make somebody's life easier, you become their hero.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate you talking with us here. It's been a great talk. And audience, thank you for tuning in. I hope you have enjoyed this. If you have, do me a favor, email Gun.io and let them know that you've enjoyed this. That way they keep asking me to do these. So anyhow, thank you so much. Thank you, Keith. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.